Some people sleep with the TV on. Others leave the hallway light shining. But there are those who need a voice in the dark, just so they won't feel so alone. If you've ever spent the whole night searching for a reason not to give up, if you've ever felt that the silence of your home echoes louder than any shout, if you've ever discovered that loneliness has a weight, and sometimes that weight is heavier than your body can bear, this story is for you. If, in the end, it keeps you company, come back anytime you like. And if you want to give me permission to keep telling you stories of those who live in silence, let me come back, but only if it's in your own time, at your own pace, in your own pain. Her name was Alinda, but it had been 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days since anyone called her that. Ever since Paolo died on a Monday in March, going out to buy navy blue thread and never coming back, the phone only rang to warn about overdue bills or for someone at the bank to offer a loan with interest she couldn't understand. Her kids called on Sundays, always at 2 in the afternoon, always in a hurry, always checking if everything was okay but never asking how she really was. "Everything okay, Mum?" "Yeah, son." "And your blood pressure? Are you taking your meds?" "I am." "And the bills? Need anything?" "No, everything's fine." "All right then, we'll talk more later." And the line went quiet again, leaving a silence that weighed more than all the words left unsaid, more than every "I love you" that no one said anymore, more than every "How are you really feeling?" that no one asked anymore. The 3-bedroom house in Villa Esperanza was now way too big for just one person. Too big for someone who no longer had anyone to share the taste of morning coffee with, the lame joke the news anchor made, or the fear of a strange noise in the night. It was a house built for a family, now occupied only by memories and a 73-year-old woman who had forgotten how to fill space on her own. The couple's bedroom became hers alone, yet she kept sleeping on the right side of the bed, leaving the left side untouched, with Paolo's pillow still there, still marked by his head, as if he might come back from the bathroom and lie down with that sigh of someone who worked all day at the sewing machine and could finally rest. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she'd stretch her hand toward his side and forget, just for a second. For 1 second, she still expected to feel that warm belly, that familiar arm, and when she touched nothing but emptiness, her heart would pound as if in shock, as if it were the very first time she realized he wasn't there anymore. The kids' room, once full of scattered toys, dirty clothes on the floor, and sibling arguments, was now a storage room for things she didn't know where else to keep. Christmas boxes she no longer set up, because Christmas alone made no sense. Paolo's clothes she couldn't donate because they still smelled like him, still held the shape of his body, shoes still caked with dirt from his last walk. And the third room, where Paolo sewed the clothes he sold at the Saturday market, remained exactly as he left it that Monday in March, when he went out to buy navy blue thread to finish Mrs. Maria's skirt hem and never returned. The old Singer sewing machine, which made that steady rhythm she complained interrupted her soap opera, now sat covered by a white sheet, the spools of thread, organized by color, from the lightest blue to the darkest, from blood red to wine red, the scissors in place, the measuring tape rolled up, the metal thimble he used so he wouldn't prick his finger, all of it just as he left it, as though he might come back next Monday to finish what he'd left half done, as though death was simply an extra long break between one stitch and the next. Alinda woke up at 5 in the morning, not because she had to, but because her body forgot how to sleep past 5. 42 years getting up at 5 to make coffee for her husband before he went to work. 42 years of a routine she couldn't unlearn, even though she had no one else to serve. She'd get up, set her bare feet on the cold winter floor, and walk to the kitchen, feeling the weight of her own body, the weight of the years, the weight of the loneliness that grew heavier day by day. She made coffee, always made enough for two, always set out 2 cups on the blue Formica table they'd bought when they married in 1968, back when the world was different and they believed they'd grow old together, die together, on the same day, at the same time, so neither would ever have to be alone. She'd only realize her mistake when she went to put sugar in the second cup and remembered there was no one to drink it. No one to complain the coffee was too strong. No one to kiss her forehead and say, "Good morning, love," before heading out. Then she'd put the empty cup back in the cupboard, sit at the kitchen table, and drink her coffee alone, staring at the empty chair across from her. The chair where Paolo had sat every single day for 42 years, always reading the newspaper out loud, always commenting on the news as if she couldn't read, always leaving crumbs on the table, always forgetting to put the butter back in the fridge. All those little annoyances, little things she'd now give anything to see once more. The silence in the house felt different from the silence before. When Paolo was alive, silence was a pause between conversations, a moment to breathe before the next topic. It was comfortable. Now, silence was a presence. It was a character. It was the third resident of the house. And it was a noisy resident, screaming absence in every room, echoing loneliness off every wall, reminding her every second that she was alone in a world made for two. It wasn't merely the absence of sound. It was the presence of emptiness, the echo of conversations that would never happen again, the hum of the fridge switching on and off without anyone around to complain about the noise, the ticking clock in the living room marking time that seemed to have stopped in March, when everything changed and she had to learn to be one person instead of half of a couple. After breakfast, Alinda would tidy up a house that was already tidy. She'd mop a floor that wasn't dirty because only she walked on it. She'd organize drawers that were already organized because only she touched them. She'd fold clothes she'd barely worn because she didn't leave the house, didn't get visits, had no reason to dress up, and she did it slowly, very slowly, stretching out each task, because if she finished quickly, she'd have too much time left to think, and thinking hurt more than doing. Thinking was remembering, and remembering felt like bleeding inside. By 9 in the morning, she'd turn on the TV to hear human voices. She wouldn't really watch it, she just listened. The host talking about a cake recipe she wouldn't make, because baking a whole cake just for herself wasn't worth it. The reporter explaining the city's traffic, the city she no longer really knew, because she didn't drive, didn't go out, had nowhere to go. People in the studio audience laughing at something she wasn't paying attention to because she couldn't find anything funny anymore. Voices that filled the house with borrowed presence, a companionship that didn't know she existed, that didn't care if she was okay or not, that was there by happenstance. At lunchtime, she cooked for one, but there were always leftovers. She always cooked as if she still had someone to share with, as if her body hadn't learned yet that it was only her now. She'd eat half, put the rest in the fridge, and the next day she'd reheat it and eat alone, chewing slowly, unhurried, making lunch last longer than her hunger, because after lunch stretched a whole afternoon she had to fill. The afternoon was long, very long. She'd sit on the porch to watch the street, mums picking up their kids from school, chatting outside, complaining about the teacher, planning a birthday party, men coming home from work, honking at a neighbor, stopping to talk about soccer, children playing on the sidewalk, shouting and running, filling the street with life. Life happening out there while she watched from inside, like someone watching a movie on TV, close by, but separate, present, yet absent, existing, but not living. By 6 in the evening, the weight of night began to fall. It wasn't just darkness creeping in, it was solitude arriving. That time of day when families gather for dinner, to talk about how their day went, to be together. And there she was, alone, remembering how 6 o'clock used to be the best time of day, when Paolo came home and the house became a home again. By 6:30, it was already too dark for anyone living alone. By 7, she'd already washed the dishes from one plate, one cup, one mug. Dishes that barely got dirty, but that she washed carefully, as though it were a ritual. Each clean plate a tiny victory against the chaos she felt inside. By 8, she'd cleaned the house that was already clean again, mopped a floor that wasn't dirty, reorganized what was already organized. By 9, she'd watched the news and discovered the world was getting more violent, more distant, more impossible to understand. And after 9, the night stretched on. Nights were the worst. That was when loneliness crept out of the corners and filled every space, when silence rang louder than any noise, when the longing for Paolo squeezed her chest in a way that even her blood pressure meds couldn't relieve, when she lay in bed feeling the weight of the entire world pressing on her chest, stopping the air from entering her lungs properly, making her wonder if she'd get through another night, another day, another week like that. It was on one of those May nights, when the rain beat against the bedroom window and the wind made the house groan like it was haunted, that Alinda discovered that a lonely person's home has its own echo. Every step down the hallway sounded like 2 sets of footsteps. Every door she closed echoed like goodbye. Every sigh reverberated through the walls as if the house were a hollow cave full of ghosts. And it was on one of those nights she turned on the bedroom radio for the first time in years. The device was on Paolo's nightstand, a digital clock radio with red numbers that he used to wake up early on market days. She wasn't even sure it still worked. It had been so long since it was last turned on. Paolo was the one who handled these things, who understood the buttons, the tuning, the frequencies. She pressed a button awkwardly, not expecting anything, and from inside that small square device, a voice emerged. It was a woman. Her voice was calm, slow, talking about traffic on the marginal Tiete, the next day's forecast of 73 degrees, city news. Alinda no longer really knew because she didn't go out, didn't walk, didn't participate. Nothing fancy, nothing extraordinary, nothing world-changing. Just a human voice slicing through the silence of the night like a knife cuts bread. But to someone who'd gone hours, days, weeks without hearing anyone speak her name, even a stranger's voice sounded like music. Lying in bed with her eyes closed, Alinda pretended the woman was speaking only to her, pretended they had met at the bakery and now the woman was there, sitting in a chair in her room, sharing daily news, keeping company with someone who had no one else to tell how their day went. And for the first time in months, the night didn't feel so endless, so heavy, so impossible to endure. "It's 11:15 at night," said the radio voice, clear and comforting. "And if you're awake now, know you're not alone. We're here on the other side, keeping you company until the sun comes up. If you're driving through the night, if you're working the late shift, if you can't sleep, we're in this together. And Alinda, who had forgotten what it felt like to know someone cared, that someone was aware there were people awake while the world slept, felt a warmth in her chest. Not happiness, not yet, just the feeling that somewhere, someone remembered that there are people alone in the night. Someone who cared if you couldn't sleep. The radio became a habit. Every night at 10:30, she'd lie down, cover her feet with the plaid blanket Paolo always complained was too thin, and turn on the late night program. She began to recognize the voices as if they were neighbors, as if they were friends who dropped by every evening at the same time. Sandra, who hosted the midnight show, talking about music and reading messages from listeners with a sweet voice that reminded Alinda of the daughter she almost had, but lost in her 6th month of pregnancy. Roberto, who played oldies through the late night, always dedicating songs to anyone going through a hard time, or anyone working through the night to support their family. Carla, who at 2 a.m. read letters from people who had no one else to write to, people who wanted to share their pain with someone who would understand. And there was Jorge, who delivered personal messages at 3:30 for people coming home from work or those who still couldn't sleep, always ending with, "And remember, if you're listening alone, you're not alone. We're here." Alinda found herself looking forward to these shows like someone expecting guests, like someone with a social engagement. She knew which song would play after the 11:40 break. She knew when Sandra would giggle off script, always when someone sent in a funny message or when she messed up a song title. She knew Roberto played Altamar Dutra every Thursday. Thursday was good old days night. She knew Carla always teared up a bit whenever she read a letter from someone who'd lost someone. And she knew Jorge always wrapped up by saying, "For those of you listening by yourselves, you're not alone. We'll meet again tomorrow." On the hardest nights, when she missed Paolo so intensely it felt like a heart attack, when the house felt like a cave of echoes, when the future stretched like a road to nowhere, when she questioned whether it was worth waking up the next day, Alinda turned the radio up a little. Not too loud, just enough for the voices to fill the empty spaces around her ribs. So, the loneliness wouldn't shout so loudly in her head, so she could borrow the presence of those radio people and make the house feel less haunted, less like a graveyard, less like the place where someone had died and left only sadness. She began to talk back, softly, whispering into her pillow like it was a secret. When Roberto asked, "How are you all feeling tonight?" she answered, "I'm here, Roberto. Sad, but here. Alone, but alive." When Sandra said, "Good evening to everyone listening," she replied, "Good evening, Sandra. Thank you for being here. Thank you for talking to me." When Jorge wished a good night, she wished it back, like a real conversation, as if they could hear her, as if they cared about her response. One June night, Carla read a letter on her 2 a.m. show that made Alinda stop breathing for a few seconds. It was from a 70-year-old woman, widowed for 2 years, thanking them for keeping her company at night. "You are my late-night family," the letter said, and Carla read slowly, carefully, as though handling something fragile. "When the world sleeps and I'm left alone with my thoughts, my memories, my fear of tomorrow, you remind me that there are still people awake out there, people who care about whoever's on the other side of the radio. My husband died and took my will to live with him. But every night, you teach me that life can still be worth living. You save my nights, and whoever saves the nights saves a life." Listening to that, Alinda felt something she didn't know she could feel anymore. She realized she wasn't alone, that there were others like her, awake at night, craving a human voice for company, that there were others who understood what it was like to sleep alone in a house once brimming with life, that there were others who knew the weight of silence, the taste of loneliness, the fear of getting through one more day, that there were others who clung to the radio like a lifeline in the middle of the sea. And that's when she decided to write. She got up from bed, went to the dresser, and pulled out a piece of floral-bordered blue stationery she'd had in the drawer forever. Paper that Paolo had given her for Mother's Day, paper she never really used because she wasn't in the habit of writing letters, didn't have any distant relatives, didn't have a close friend. She grabbed a blue pen, the same one he used to record sewing orders, still sitting on his bedside table, along with the glasses he forgot that March morning. She sat on the bed, turned on the dim, yellowish lamp, and started to write. She didn't write much. She didn't know how to write beautifully like people on TV, like book authors, like those who went to school and learned fancy words. She just wrote from the heart, the way she'd speak if she had the courage to call the station and talk on air, if she wasn't so embarrassed of her own voice that no longer knew how to sound around other people. Hi, my name is Alinda. I've been listening to you every night for 2 months, and I wanted to say thank you. I'm not sure if you'll read this letter or if it's important enough, but I need to speak. My husband died 3 years ago, and ever since, the house has been really quiet, too quiet. I used to complain that he watched soccer way too loud. I used to complain that he snored. I used to complain that he sang off-key in the shower. Now I'd give anything to hear him shouting goal again, to hear him snoring beside me, to hear him singing those old songs I pretended to hate, but actually made me smile. But when I turn on the radio and listen to you speak, it's like having someone here with me. Like the house is not just mine anymore. Like I'm not the only person awake in the world. You don't know it, but you keep me company when I need it most. You remind me that I'm still a person. Thank you for existing. Thank you for talking to those of us awake in the wee hours. You save my nights. And whoever saves the nights saves a life. She folded the letter carefully, as if it were sacred, slipped it into the matching envelope she found in the drawer, wrote down the radio station's address, which she had on a slip of paper that came with her electric bill, sealed it with a lick like she used to when mailing letters to her kids during their summer breaks at Grandma's, back when she still had people to worry about, people to see, and kisses to, people to tell she loved them. Then she tucked it into her purse. She carried that letter around for a whole week. Every day she thought about mailing it. Every day she made up an excuse. What if they think it's silly? What if they don't read all the letters? What if it gets lost among all the others? What if they laugh at my bad handwriting? What if they realize I'm just a lonely old woman with nothing better to do? But mostly, what if they read it on air and I'm embarrassed? Because Alinda had forgotten how it felt to be seen, to exist in other people's eyes, to believe she had the right to speak, to be heard, to take up space in the world. And the thought of someone knowing her story made her both scared and hopeful. On the 7th day, passing by the post office after buying medicine at the pharmacy, she stopped, looked at the bright yellow facade of the building she'd known since childhood, looked at the wrinkled letter inside the plastic purse she took whenever she went for meds, and she thought, if I don't send it, nobody will ever know I exist. And if I die tomorrow, who will know I was here? Who will know I felt, that I suffered, that I tried to keep living even after life ended? She went inside, her heart pounding as if she were committing a crime, handed the letter to the uniformed clerk who didn't even look at her, paid for the stamp with change she double counted because she was so nervous, and left quickly as if fleeing the scene of something illicit. Her heart thumped, her palms were sweaty, and she felt strangely like she just leapt off a cliff without knowing if there was a safety net below. Then she forgot, or tried to, or pretended to, because life went on the same as before. Waking at 5, accidentally making coffee for 2, tidying a tidy house, turning on the TV just to hear voices, having lunch alone, spending the afternoons on the porch, eating a quick dinner, waiting for nightfall to turn on the radio and pretend she had someone in the house to keep her company, that someone cared if she was okay or not, if she'd make it through another night. 2 weeks of forced forgetting, 2 weeks pretending she hadn't mailed anything, 2 weeks telling herself it was all nonsense, an old lady's whim, a lonely woman's silly pastime, 2 weeks trying not to hope for anything, not to imagine anything, not to dream someone would read her letter, care about it, or reply, until one Thursday, June 22nd, at 2:44 a.m., Olinda heard her name on the radio for the first time in her life. "This letter really moved me," said Carla, speaking more slowly than usual, more gently, like she was holding something fragile. "It's from Mrs. Olinda, here in our state, who wrote us something that touched me and our entire team at the station. Olinda, if you're listening, I want you to know that your letter reached us, and we were all so moved by your words. We felt what you wrote, and this next song, it's for you." And Carla read it, word for word, every line Olinda had written in that moment of bravery, every feeling she had poured out onto the page, afraid of being judged, embarrassed to open up, scared of bothering someone. As Carla read on, Olinda felt something strange stirring in her chest. It was like seeing her own reflection after years of only looking down at the floor, at nothing. Before, I complained that he watched soccer too loudly. Now I'd give anything to hear him shouting goal again. Carla's voice nearly cracked there, and Olinda, lying in bed with her eyes closed, felt someone finally understood her. That someone, somewhere else in the city, had read her words and cared enough to share them on air, responding like an old friend, like family, as if she mattered. At the end of the letter, Carla, voice trembling, said, "Olinda dear, you are not alone. We're here, and you are part of our late night family. You belong to us now. And for everyone listening who identifies with Olinda, everyone who knows the pain of losing the companion of a lifetime, you're not alone either. We hear you. We care for you. We come together here every single night." In bed with her radio turned low, Olinda felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Joy. She cried tears of joy because she remembered she had a name, because she realized that someone knew she existed. Someone, somewhere in this city, had read her words, cared enough to read them on air, and answered like an old friend, like family, like she mattered. And for the first time since Paolo died, Olinda cried tears of happiness. She cried because she remembered she had a name. She cried because she discovered she could still mean something to someone else. She cried because she realized she hadn't died with him. She had only forgotten how to live alone. She cried because she understood she was still here, still breathing, still had a voice, still had a story to share. The next day was different. Everything was different. Morning coffee actually tasted like coffee, not like a chore. It wasn't too strong or too weak, it was just right. The morning TV wasn't just noise, it was a chosen companion. The house didn't feel like a haunted mansion. It felt like a place someone named Olinda lived in, someone with a name, a story, a place in the world. And when night came, she didn't turn on the radio just to escape loneliness. She turned it on because now she was part of it. She belonged there. She was Olinda, the letter writer, Olinda from the late night family, Olinda who mattered. And when Carla said, "Good evening to our dear listener Olinda, who's out there with us," she answered out loud, no longer in a whisper, "Good evening, Carla. Thank you for everything. Thank you for seeing me." She started writing more, not just letters to the radio. She began writing for herself, little notes she left around the house, almost like two people lived there, the Olinda who wrote and the Olinda who read, the Olinda who cared and the Olinda who was cared for. "Good morning, Olinda," on the bathroom mirror. "You can face another day," on the fridge door. "There are still people who hear you," on the headboard. "Paolo would be proud of you," on the picture in the living room where they appeared young, smiling, believing they'd be young forever. The house began talking back. It was no longer just an echo of absence. It was a conversation. It was presence speaking to presence. A home for living people, not a graveyard for the dead. One Saturday in July, while sorting Paolo's clothes so she could finally donate some, because 3 years was too long to keep everything like a museum, she found a letter he'd written to her years ago for their 20th wedding anniversary. A letter she'd tucked in a shoebox and forgotten. In the middle of it, between words of love and promises for a future that the future never allowed, he wrote, "Olinda, your voice soothes me. Even when you're silent, you speak from the heart. Don't forget that if I'm no longer here to remind you every day how special you are." Olinda folded the letter, pressed it to her chest, and understood. Paolo had known. In some way, he'd known she would need that reminder of her own voice, that she'd need to rediscover she could speak to the world without him by her side, that the voice she searched for on the radio had been inside her all along. She just needed someone to answer back, to listen, to remind her that she existed. She started replying more often. She wrote a second letter to the radio, a third, a fourth. Whenever she felt she had something to share, she reached for the blue paper and Paolo's pen. She wrote not to ask for anything, not to complain, but just to say she was there, that she existed, that she belonged to that nighttime community of people caring for one another from a distance. Carla always read them, always responded, always ended by saying, "Olinda, you are a light in our late night hours." And more people started writing, inspired by Olinda. The station created a segment called Late Night Letters, dedicated to those who wanted to share their loneliness instead of carrying it alone. In one of the letters Carla read, a 50-year-old woman said, "I listened to the radio because of Olinda. When I heard her first letter, I thought, if she can do it, I can do it too. If she has the courage to speak up, so can I. Thank you, Olinda, for showing me that writing isn't just for people who can write beautifully. It's for people who feel, and we all know how to feel." Hearing that, Olinda discovered something she never expected to learn at 73. She could inspire others, that her pain, when shared, could become medicine for someone else's pain, that her loneliness, when spoken, helped others feel less alone, that her voice, which she thought no longer mattered, helped others find their own voices. And more letters poured in, people who could relate, people who understood, people who also slept with the radio on, who also spoke to themselves, who sometimes forgot they were still alive. And Olinda realized she wasn't the only one. The world was full of people like her. Invisible people, forgotten people, people who just needed someone to say, I see you, I hear you, you matter. So now, when she switches on the radio at 10:30 at night, Olinda doesn't only hear the hosts, she hears her own voice replying. She hears herself laugh when Roberto tells a bad joke. She hears her own good evening when the show ends. And before she goes to sleep, she whispers to the darkness, good night, Paolo. Good night, everyone on the radio. Good night to everyone who's listening. Good night, Olinda. And the house that used to echo emptiness now echoes presence, echoes life, echoes her name spoken gently, echoes a voice that learned how to be heard again. The loneliness hasn't gone away. It still hurts sometimes. It still squeezes her chest on the longest nights. It still whispers in her ear that it might be easier just to give up. But now she knows loneliness isn't a punishment, it's a state. And states can change. Sometimes you're by yourself, sometimes you have people around. Sometimes you're alone, but not lonely. And sometimes you realize you weren't as alone as you thought, that there were people out there waiting for your voice on the other side of town, that someone was waiting for you to speak so they could reply, that someone needed your story to understand their own. Now Olinda knows that existing isn't just breathing, it's being present, it's taking up space, it's speaking, even when your voice trembles. It's writing, even if your handwriting is messy. It's letting yourself be seen, heard, and remembered. It's realizing that life didn't end when Paolo died. It changed. It got harder. It got lonelier. But it didn't end. Because sometimes we don't need much. Sometimes we just need someone to call our name in the dark and remind us we're still here, that we're still breathing, that we still matter, that we still exist, even when the rest of the world seems to have forgotten we have a name, a story, a beating heart, a pain that hurts, and a joy that can still spark. Sometimes all we need is a voice that shows us we're not talking to ourselves in the darkness, that someone is listening, that someone cares, that someone knows we exist. And that's enough to make the difference between enduring and giving up, between continuing and stopping, between living and just existing. And if this story struck a chord within you, if it reminded you of someone who was there for you when you needed them most, or if it reminded you of yourself looking for a voice in the dark so you wouldn't feel so alone in the world, let me come back, but only when you're ready. In your silence, in your pain, only with your permission, because I only speak to those who want to listen. I only come back to those who want me back. I'll only keep sharing stories of people who live in silence, but still breathe, still feel, still exist, if you wish. And if you know someone who lies awake in silence, who needs to hear their own name said gently, who's forgotten they have a voice, a story, and that they matter, share this story with them. Sometimes a story is the hug someone has never received. Sometimes a story is the voice someone has been searching for in the middle of the night. Sometimes a story is the reminder that we still exist, still breathe, still matter, and can still be a light in someone else's darkest hour. Which part of this story spoke to you the most? Tell me in the comments. Someone out there is waiting to hear that they're not alone in how they feel. Someone needs to know they're not the only one who sleeps with the radio on, who talks to themselves, who cries in the dark, who misses even the annoying things. If you'd like, there's a playlist called Stories for Those Who Walk in Silence. Listen when your heart says it's time. There's no rush. Silence knows how to wait. And those who walk in silence deserve stories that speak the language of the heart, that understand the grammar of loneliness, that translate the dialect of those who lost their voice, but still want to be heard.